Hey folks, Matt here from Single Tracks, and today we're with another bike for the Mid-Travel Mashup, our trail bike review roundup. Today we've got the Privateer 141. So this trail bike comes from a newer brand, Privateer. So far they've got the 161 and now the 141. They're under the same umbrella as Hunt Wheels. So they're a direct-to-consumer brand based out of the UK, and they're basically selling affordable, durable, quality stuff that is made to get beat up at a really reasonable price. So in our mid-travel mashup, we're reviewing bikes from the 120 millimeter range up to the 140 or the 141 millimeter range. This is definitely on the longer travel trail spectrum. Everything about the bike is made to be durable and long-lasting and just hold up to what a privateer, unsponsored racer or rider would need. Again, you've got an aluminum frame, a Horst link suspension layout with a machined aluminum single piece rocker arm. Privateer says this should extend bearing life and improve the overall stiffness of the frame. You've got a threaded bottom bracket, of course, and the cable routing is part internal, part external. It's external where it makes sense, like the rear brake cable. If you've got to swap that out in a hurry, makes it a lot cleaner, a lot easier. So getting into sizing and geometry on the Privateer 141, Privateer uses a P1 through P4 scheme instead of calling their bikes small, medium, large, extra large. And so what we've got is the P2, which is essentially medium. Geometry on our P2 starts with a 64.5 degree head tube angle, a 78.76 degree seat tube angle, 465 millimeter reach. Chainstays on this P2 are 440 millimeters in length, and those are size specific, so you get a 6 millimeter change on each size. This build is a Shimano SLX build, so it's mostly Shimano SLX drivetrain parts, but then you get an XT shifter, you get a race face cockpit, one-up dropper post, Fox suspension front and rear, Hunt wheels, and price on this XT SLX Privateer 141 build is just under $4,000. The weight on this P2 XT SLX build is 34.3 pounds. So comparing this bike with one of the lighter trail bikes in our mid-travel mashup, the Trail 429 by Pivot, that bike's about 27 pounds, so this bike is about 7 pounds heavier. So again, talking about 120 to 141, this is definitely on the heavier end of the spectrum for our trail bikes. Thus, for me, taking out the Privateer 141 became sort of a point of internal debate. I only wanted to take it out when I knew I had a descent that justified the climb. At about 35 pounds with pedals, it's safe to say that this is a lot of trail bike. Now, that's not to say it was a bad climber at all. The suspension tune on this 141 does feel very efficient. You really get that platform feeling when you're pedaling. It sits nice and high, very little pedal bob, and that efficiency is balanced with really good traction when you're trying to get up ledgy, rocky climbs. So you kind of get the best of both worlds here. You get something that sits nice and high, it's very firm, very efficient when you're pedaling, but then it remains very active. You get a ton of traction while you're trying to get up that really ledgy, rocky stuff. On top of that, you have this almost 79 degree seat tube angle that just keeps your weight just about perfect, keeps you really forward feeling and really on top of the bike while you're trying to get up those really steep climbs. For a lot of trails here in Colorado where you're just going up for an hour or two and then you're descending for 15-20 minutes, that seat tube angle comes in handy. And I found that on lesser grade, more moderate trails, it didn't feel too cramped. I didn't feel like I was slammed into the bars too much or really just kind of fighting against the cockpit. And the bike grew on me riding around those more moderate trails too. Again, it's not something I would buy if I was riding a really diverse range of trails. This bike feels really geared towards somebody who's just normally going after very aggressive trails. But at the same time, it wasn't an unbearable bore riding it around, say, some blue-rated cross-country trail, a little bit more undulating. But still, at the end of the day, the weight is kind of the biggest factor when you're talking about this bike going uphill. The suspension is there, the geometry is there. At over 34 pounds, though, it's not going to be my first pick if I'm doing a ton of climbing and more moderate cross-country, not-so-rough trails. Descending is obviously where the Privateer 141 is going to shine. It felt like it took a little bit for me to learn how to shine with it. This is definitely one of the longest bikes I've ever ridden at 465 millimeters of reach. It's almost an inch longer than my own bike in terms of reach. It's over an inch longer than my own bike in the wheelbase. And so that added length takes some getting used to. You learn to ride in a more forward position, and at the same time, I felt like once I got that position down, I got more out of my cornering ability as well. And then you couple this really long wheelbase with a really long reach, and it feels damn near invincible on a lot of really rough trails. Fast, choppy, steep. This thing feels nearly unshakable for a 141mm trail bike. And it's still surprisingly playful. This bike does not feel as long as it actually is around corners. Where I think this gets interesting, and you can kind of compare it with the Santa Cruz Tallboy. When that came out in 2019, you had a 120mm travel bike with a 65-degree head tube angle. And everybody was like, holy cow, that's really slack for a cross-country bike. When I rode the Tallboy, I got into some situations where I felt absolutely comfortable because of the geometry, the head tube angle, the wheelbase, the reach. I could ride steep stuff, but the suspension couldn't always keep up. And I feel like that's sort of the case too with this Privateer 141. You're going to get into situations where you feel absolutely stable, confident because of that geometry, and you're going to realize, oh, I only have 141mm of rear travel. That's not to say I outrode this bike, because I absolutely did not, but at the same time, you're getting geometry that can do just about anything on a mid-travel bike. And for really aggressive riders who might run into the same thing, you can always just throw a volume spacer in the rear shock or the fork to make it a little bit more progressive in the end and to keep yourself riding a little bit higher. All right, so let's talk about the build kit on the Privateer 141. Again, to recap, we've got the Shimano SLX mashup build. That gets you a Shimano XT shifter. The rest of everything is basically Shimano SLX. Magura MT5 brakes. I really like these brakes for this bike. I had thought that the MT5s wouldn't be as powerful as the MT7s, but they've been completely adequate for this bike and the weight. I like the MT5 levers even a little bit better than I like the MT7s, because you feel like you're still getting the same amount of power, but there's less moving parts on the MT5 levers. It feels like there's less to go wrong. Fox suspension, I don't think there's much bad we can say about that. Right at $4,000, it's pretty sweet that you're getting a Fox 36 fork with a Grip 2 damper. You're getting a DPX2 rear shock. So really no major concerns there. Hunt trail wide wheels, these things have been awesome. You get 5 degrees of engagement out of there. Burly aluminum wheels that feel nice and stiff that you can really beat up. I feel like it fits in with this bike perfectly. Schwalbe tires, a long travel 1-up V2 dropper post. I don't think there is anything I would change about the build. There's definitely stuff you could lighten on the build. You could lighten the wheels, you could lighten the cockpit, but that's coming at a price. It's coming at over $4,000. On the frame side, I think it's pretty cool that they went with an externally routed brake hose. If you run into problems with that, or just need to bleed or swap a brake hose, it makes the job just a lot easier rather than running the hose through the inside of the frame, getting brake fluid all over the place. All right, so talking about who this bike is made for, what trails does it feel best on? I think that's even obvious just looking at the bike. Going over the numbers, the weight, the build kit on the website, I think you can get an idea of who this bike is made for. It's made for the trail rider who is maybe on a budget, wants something that's going to get a lot of performance, but doesn't want to pay that $5,000–$6,000 price tag for something they can get it for. 141 is something I've been able to ride on more moderate trails in Wyoming, and on the same trip I took it to Deer Valley Bike Park. I rode some of the steeper double black trails there, and I was satisfied on both. It's not the bike I would pick if I was just riding those trails in Wyoming. If I was just riding more moderate blue rated trails, it's not the bike I would pick. I would go for the Ibis Ripley AF or the Norco, the Canfield Tilt. The 141 is something I'd pick if I was riding more bike park, aggressive trails regularly, where it pays off to have the geometry and the weight. All right, folks, there you have it. That's our review of the Privateer 141. We had a blast riding this bike over the past month or two. Hope you enjoyed watching the video. Check out our other videos from the Single Tracks Mid-Travel Mashup. They're all on YouTube. If you like the review, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Have a great day out there, and we'll see you on the trails.